Have you ever gotten one of those happy holiday emails before break? You know, your boss is like, oh, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, like whatever. Have you ever gotten one of those? I got one of those my first year teaching, and although it started off really joyful, it ended so miserably and nearly derailed my entire break. So let me tell you about it. I taught in this very rural school, and we had a very tight budget. And apparently before Christmas break, the administration found out that we were not going to be receiving all that we anticipated from our annual budget. And with that news, they decided that one way they could cut back on spending was through reduction in personnel, aka laying people off. And I was a brand new hire, and I knew what they said. The last one hired, first one fired. And so I was terrified. So I opened up that email before break, and I saw that have a happy holidays, and I got to the end, and I was like, oh my gosh, I might have a job in January. And I was freaking out. And I'm telling you this because this was the first time I realized just how heavily I based my personality and my identity on being a teacher. And through this process, it's also the first time I learned about why I shouldn't base my identity on being a teacher. And so today we're going to be talking about that, because being able to know that your identity should not rest in being a teacher is one thing, but actually being able to implement that consistently, that's a whole nother game. And that's also kind of my story as well. So like my first year teaching, I knew I needed to separate my identity, but then I kept kind of going back and doing that my first few years teaching. However, in more recent years, I feel like I have drawn a much clearer line in between personal life and my professional life. And I want to share some of those strategies that have helped me in case it might be helpful to you as well. So I have felt lost multiple times in my teaching career, and I can always trace it back to it being when my world is solely revolving around my job and there aren't too many other things competing for my attention, or at least not too many other things winning my attention. And I've employed some different strategies over the years that have helped. One I always talk about is the change in my management approach, which has really helped me be able to kind of decompress, which has helped me make teaching a lot less stressful, and has helped me be able to mentally punch out when I leave work. But the other thing I haven't really talked about is my perspective change I've had on my job. And I want to tell you a story about that, because I can trace my perspective change back to a few certain days, but then the real one that just hit this point home for me, I can recall the exact moment and even the exact words that got to stick for me. So this moment in particular was the first day of school. And it was not an ordinary first day of school, because if you've heard me talk about this ridiculous class I taught one year called Informational Literacy, you know that it was just absolute mayhem. So long story short, I had to teach a basically made up class. I was given one piece of standards from 15 years before I taught the class and nothing else, and was told have at it with these groupings of students that made no sense, huge class sizes, and minimal to no organization for anything. And it was just a madhouse. And so I was juggling all of that stress with work, but what also made this time in my life so much more challenging was that the first day of school, this same exact year, my grandfather died. And he had been sick for a while before then. We knew it was getting to the end. He had Alzheimer's. But I remember coming home after that first day of school, and like I knew at that point I got into my car that he had passed. It was one of those things where like if I looked at my phone that day, I wouldn't be able to make it through the day. So I just kept my phone tucked away, and then after school I found it. And of course, like I called my dad that night, and we're crying, we're talking on the phone, and I'm grieving not only the loss of my grandfather, but also the loss of having like a stable career, because the year before I was a regular classroom teacher and I had a schedule and a curriculum that made sense, and now I was going into just this complete mayhem, and I felt like my foundation had rocked so tremendously. And my dad said something to me that honestly to this day still might be one of the most impactful things anyone has ever said to me. And he was on the other side of the phone, and I was sitting on my bed, and he said, you know, when we were at the nursing home today with your grandfather and he passed, all these nurses who had been working with him for years, they came in and they were crying and they were hugging him and my grandmother, and they were grieving the loss of my grandfather. But my dad said, you know what they're going to do tonight, Ashlyn? They're going to punch out of work. They're going to drive home. They're going to have dinner with their family, and they're going to be okay, because their work is their work and their life is their life. And that hit me like a freight truck. That moment, I can still like feel the reaction I had in my body when I was like, damn, that is absolutely true. You know, there are all of these workers in these professions where it's so intense, like it is life or death, and their life can't stop just because somebody else's does. And it made me think, like, I'm a teacher, you know, and our job is so important, but oftentimes it doesn't come down to the extremes of life or death. But people who are in these fields, like, they're able to be okay because they have that compartmentalization, they have that separation in their mind. And that night, I committed to having that same separation in my life. And I would be lying if I told you it was always consistent after that and there was always a perfect work-life balance and I've never lost myself my job again. But that would be a bold-faced lie because I have been nowhere near the point where I was previously. Now I'm able to catch myself before I find myself sliding down into that hole where I am just full-blown teacher mode all the time. And I'm able to catch myself and do more things for me. And I want to tell you some of those things I've done that have helped, but I also want to tell you what I've learned through this whole process of losing myself in teaching and then learning how to separate them. First things first, I've learned that my identity cannot rest in my career. You know, I'm a person of faith, so I believe my identity rests in God and God alone. And this whole process has also reignited my own spiritual walk. I've learned how writing about my experiences in my day in the form of poetry can really help me decompress. I've also learned the importance of making social plans after work so that I can go be social with humans who aren't 11 years old. And I also made a very clear ultimatum to myself after that first year that I just told you about to really protect my peace. And it was either the principal who was working at my school at the time leaves or I leave. I could not do that same year again. And sure enough, he did end up resigning. And so I stayed at that school for one additional year. But I came to that decision because I was not going to subject myself to that year that I just experienced under that leadership. And it was scary, you know, thinking about applying to a new job and starting over. It's a scary thought, but it is necessary. I also started color blocking my days and trying to keep track of the good things that were happening so I didn't feel like I was being weighed down by all of the difficult parts of my day. So when something was positive, I color a block in a spreadsheet green. If it was just okay, yellow. If it was a tough moment, red. But I would do that, then reflect back on my day before I left work to remember all those good things I experienced. And recently, since January, save when grades are due, because when grades are due, it is like final season in college all over again. But since January, I have not worked outside of my contract hours on my teaching stuff. And there are a few caveats to that, of course. And I want to make a video in further detail talking about my experiences only working during contract hours. But two things I've done to really help me with that and to help keep this work-life balance has been having two separate planners. So I'll have one running Google Doc kind of planner for my week where I'll keep track of all the tasks I need to do each day of the week and I'll delete them as I go. But I've also started trying to implement that whole lucky girl syndrome in the classroom. You may have seen it online, but it's basically telling yourself that things work out well for you and focusing on those things that do go well for you throughout your day. So all of these things I've done have helped me protect my peace and keep my identity even though I'm in this high demand profession of teaching. Because if there's one thing I've learned this entire process, it is the importance of peace. And when you are losing yourself to your job, you don't have that peace. And it's crazy because I feel like peace is one of those things that we don't really appreciate until it's not there and we're like, oh my gosh, come back, I need you. But you deserve to feel that peace. You deserve to feel that ease going into work and waking up every day. And it shouldn't take you 6 weeks over the summer to reset your body and mind to feel like yourself again. And until somebody changes our profession and the way it's structured, we need to do these changes ourselves. So hopefully one of the things and one of the strategies I shared is something that you could apply in your own life because you deserve to feel that peace. And I don't want you to feel like you are lost in your job. So with that being said, feel free to follow along and be a part of this community. I would love to help you in any ways I can. If I'm ever, feel free to DM me or email me any questions or anything. I'm in your corner and I really want to be an ally and an advocate for teachers because I've been in that position where I was like, how am I going to make it into school tomorrow? And I've seen how you can be in that place, but also how you can leave that place. And I want to help you do the same. So feel free to follow along and get different classroom ideas, get different teacher care ideas, ideas and figure out the why behind all things that we do so that you can better serve your students, but also yourself and your own well-being. So that is the episode. That is the end of this first season 2 of the podcast, which is crazy. I'll start up another season again probably in the next couple of months, but thank you for being here. Thank you for listening along, and until next time, you got this.